I thank you, Dan, for that presentation of your story. Um, the next, we're going to enter into the Q&A section of the presentation. If you're listening to this presentation and you have questions that we don't address, please email us at conferences@littlegrapevine.com, and we'll make sure to get those questions to Dan so he can answer them for you. So Dan, let's just jump into some questions here. Let's start with maybe some just preliminary stuff here. So let's talk about yourself. You've been involved in several medical device companies in the past, including, KRMD, or RMS Medical, all symbol was REPR. Throughout your career, what are some of the challenges you had to face running medical device companies?
Thanks, Maj. That's a big question, but yes, I've been in general management of small medical device businesses, public and private, for a while now. I'm getting older, and most recently, I still am on the board of directors of Koru Medical. The ticker is KRMD. Worked closely with Joe Manco at Horton Capital to restructure that company and help turn it around, and that's been a good investment, a good example of how focusing on the SG&A, focusing on the operational sales distribution channel fundamentals can get quite a nice return for the equity. Prior to that, and Koru Medical is an infusion pump business. Prior to that, I ran a company, an orthopedics company called Extant Medical, and we built that up to 90 plus million in sales, and was a very good return for the large financial sponsor OrbiMed Advisors. Prior to that, I ran a private aesthetics company called Sound Surgical Technologies, and ran that through the previous recession, and ultimately was sold to Solta Medical. Was a good return for the investors as well. But the tools are the same. It's about leadership. It's about focus. It's about being responsible and prudent with the use of capital, and in some cases, it's about being patient. These things, it looks like an overnight success. It probably had 10 years of hard work behind it.
Great. Now, I noticed that Tom's Patton has recently joined the board of directors. How was that relationship ignited, and what do you think it means for the company? And maybe you can talk about Tom.
So, yeah, Tom has had a tremendous career running small medical device companies, and we've led parallel paths to some extent. He's had his fair share of turnaround situations, as have I. Joe Manco at Horton Capital actually suggested that the two of us talk about electroCore. I've crossed paths with Tom previously in my career, although we had never worked together. And in parallel, Tom is involved in an orthopedics company, on the board of an orthopedics company that several of the founders of electroCore had worked at. So when we started talking, it just made a lot of sense to add Tom's broad business and legal experience to the team.
Great. So let's go into understanding the business.
Yep.
There's a few things I'd like to ask you here on that subject. So what type of dependency do gamma-core patients ultimately have on the product? For example, is it a lifetime solution? Can the frequency of use of the product be lessened over time?
So it varies. In cluster headache, there is often a seasonality component. And so patients will be on therapy for a few months and then go off the therapy and then come back to the therapy when that cycles back. In migraine, it tends to be less of a seasonality issue, but people grow into and grow out of migraine um, issues. And so every case is a little bit different. In general, in the protocol for prevention, patients respond better if they use the therapy more frequently. And that's a little bit subjective, but there is anecdotal data in the studies that we've done that suggests that more frequent treatment leads to better outcomes over the long haul. Because GammaCore therapy is structured as a subscription, it's an all-you-can-eat therapy for a single monthly price. There's no penalty to a patient taking one extra dose or two extra doses per day, and there's no contraindication to having multiple doses during a day. So more is generally better with GammaCore therapy.
Great. Now, what's the significance of having both the ability to market your product in prevention and treatment?
Yeah. So on the pharmaceutical side, the physicians generally have to prescribe a variety of treatments in order to give the patient the tools he needs to manage acute headache and still get some preventative benefit. There is no single pharmaceutical solution that does both acute treatment and prevention. And so having a non-pharmacological therapy that is effective both for prevention and for acute treatment is a very large competitive advantage. And since we just got the FDA clearance for prevention, we announced that at the end of March 2020. I'm really looking forward to getting back into the field post-pandemic with that extended indication.
So to get a little bit more into how the patient, use the product. I mean, you talked about it in your presentation, but how does the subscription product work? How is this the GammaCore, re-upped again? How do you?
Yeah. The device is used 2 or 3 times per day for a prevention protocol. And acutely, if a patient feels a headache coming on, and especially migraine patients generally know that an episode is coming on. There's something that is called aura that happens before the migraine is really fully engaged. And patients will tell you that when they feel that aura coming on, if they give themselves 1 or 2 stimulations, they can often abort the headache entirely, but certainly reduce the intensity and the duration of that headache. From a business model point of view, the GammaCore device, which you can see on our website, and was in pictures of it were in our presentation, we ship that when we get a new patient prescription, and then the refills are done with a little with an electronic key card. So basically, one of the cards that you use in a hotel room. When a patient gets prescribed a 30-day or a 90-day refill, that key card is dispensed from the pharmacy, and the patient just swipes that across the GammaCore Sapphire device and reloads it that way.
So when we look at some other therapies that are available to treat the conditions you're treating right now, what are they, and can you maybe list some of the competition, their names of the companies, if they're public or private?
Sure. I'm going to stay away from names of companies, but the first line therapy is over-the-counter medications. Second line therapy is generally a class of drugs called triptans that are by prescription, and they're effectively generics at this point in time. but they have side effects, and certain patients are refractory to them. And the pharmacy will generally limit the patient to 8 or 10 doses per month. And patients will tell you that they end up rationing themselves on their pills because they're not sure if this particular headache is bad enough to risk consuming the rest of their month's supply. That's why that unlimited use for 30 or 90 days in our prescription modality is a competitive advantage. Beyond triptans, Botox is on label for treatment of migraine. That's an injection or a series of injections that has to be delivered by a healthcare professional. And then more recently, there's a new class of CGRP antibodies that are also injection pharmaceuticals that have to be delivered by a healthcare professional. And those are relatively expensive therapies at this point in time.
Is there data to support why a patient should use your product? I mean, is in terms of efficacy and success?
Yeah, the company has sponsored a variety of prospective randomized controlled trials with hundreds of patients in them, and with data in prevention and acute treatment that is competitive with the reduction in headache numbers that the pharmaceuticals have. But gamma-core therapy in the acute setting tends to act faster than the pharmaceutical alternatives. So I believe that we have advantages buried in the clinical data, but we're certainly competitive with the pharmaceuticals that are available.
And what do you have data in terms of your customer retention rate, or your attrition rate?
Yeah, so what we are seeing is that between 45 and 50% of patients respond well to the therapy and come back for refills at 3 months. And over the course of a year, we have in the neighborhood of 35 to 40% of patients that are still on therapy at the end of 1 year.
Yeah, let's move into some of your growth opportunities.
Sure.
And I think you talked about in your filings, maybe exploring therapies outside of what you're currently using the product for right now. Could you talk about what some of that could be and where you are in that kind of development?
Yeah, certainly. So, as far as our growth trajectories in the United Kingdom, our paid months of therapy has been growing sort of in the 10% sequentially quarter on quarter. We're working under the ITP grants, and so we are somewhat limited in our growth by the size of that grant. We're optimistic that when the world gets back to normal post-pandemic, we'll be able to get broad NHS coverage because we've demonstrated not only clinical efficacy, but dramatic economic benefits. And so we think growth in the United Kingdom will accelerate once we obtain that broader coverage. In the VA system under the FSS, pre-COVID, we were growing 20-25% sequentially in paid months of therapy. We think the current quarter is going to be flat, but I'm eternally optimistic that we'll be able to get back to recruiting new patients, hopefully in the third quarter, but your guess is as good as mine as to when the world will return to normal. In the commercial sector in the United States, we've made some dramatic changes in the structure of our distribution to better take advantage of the commercial coverage that we've announced in the last few months with CVS and ESI, and to dramatically reduce our SG&A. And so we haven't been forecasting it, but I believe that a commercial channel for headache will start to accelerate as we roll into 2021. More recently, and I touched on it in the presentation, there's growing interest in the use of gamma core therapy for the treatment of respiratory symptoms that are associated with COVID-19, work of breathing, reduction in cytokines associated with people talk about the cytokine storm. 2 investigator-initiated trials have been started up in the use of gamma core therapy to treat respiratory systems in COVID, and we will have to see how that goes. Clearly, if our therapy can be helpful in treating patients in the pandemic, we obviously want to make the therapy available there. Longer term, the use of gamma core for respiratory therapy could be a very large business opportunity in 2021 and beyond. And I'm talking about beyond COVID, just for bronchospasm, for ARDS, for asthma. But that'll require another de novo FDA submission. And so those are all activities in 2021. COVID, we've addressed the regulatory pathway for COVID through the EUA, the Emergency Use Authorization, which is currently pending with the FDA. Beyond that, there are investigator-initiated studies in PTSD, in traumatic brain injury, which is very interesting to the work we're doing in the VA system and the military treatment facilities already. There are investigator-initiated trials going on in stroke, acute treatment of stroke. And so the platform technology really has legs into a variety of different indications, and it's going to be fascinating to watch this therapy evolve over the next few years.
Great. So let's talk about risks and liquidity here. Do you think you're well funded to reach profitability on the current cap structure? I know you raised some money recently, but you're losing some money.
Yep.
How do you view your capital structure 18 months from now, for example? What it might look like, what you might need to keep on growing?
Yeah. So pro forma with the money that we've raised in April and May, we're sitting with roughly $23 million on the balance sheet. Our historical burn rate is embarrassing. Going forward, our R&D expense is going to be dramatically reduced, and our SG&A is going to be dramatically reduced. I'm looking for our operating expenses to level off at some place between $4.5 and $5 million per quarter on a cash basis, so backing out the stock-based comp and other non-cash expenses. And revenue, will mitigate that. We did $750,000 in revenue in the quarter that ended March 31st. We've got several growth drivers once the pandemic subsides, and I'm optimistic that we will be able to close that gap between revenue and operating expense over the course of 2021 and start generating cash from operations. From a cash point of view, one important note is that we do have approximately $7 million of inventory on the balance sheet, and our marginal, our gross margin for an incremental unit sale, after we've absorbed our overhead, is well in excess of 80%. That inventory at cost will support quite a bit of revenue through 2021. And, long story short, that inventory will start to turn into a source of cash in coming quarters.
And when you look at your R&D efforts moving forward, where do you see that being applied to? Will you have to have different iterations of the product, or is it going to be more towards, trying to figure out new therapies to use with the current product without making adjustments to the product?
So in the short run, now that we've terminated the Premium 2 study, R&D is primarily supporting the various investigator-initiated trials that are out there. So COVID-19, PTSD, so extended indications, as well as just supporting the field sales effort.
So when you look at this company, what do you see the biggest risk facing the potential for you guys to grow moving forward?
So the balance sheet optics have been a challenge between the burn rate and the cash, and so demonstrating that we could reduce operating expenses and continue to grow revenue, even though we're still at small numbers, has been an important piece towards reducing the balance sheet risk. Beyond that, it's all about execution, putting the right people into the sales function, making sure that we have a business model that works both for the end patient and for the healthcare system and for the company.
And finally, your stock is trading under $1 a share. Are you starting to think about what happens if you can't qualify for NASDAQ listing after some time here? And do you even care, or is that something you want to even address until you have a situation where you're profitable and can support a higher stock price?
So no, we do care, and while the stock has dipped below $1 a share in recent days, we've never been below $1 a share for the 30 consecutive trading days that would trigger a NASDAQ response. That said, NASDAQ has, I forget what the word is, but they've voided the minimum bid requirement because of the pandemic for the time being. I believe that goes through June 30th, and my guess is that they will extend it. If we do end up challenged on the minimum bid, if you look at the proxy that we filed last month, you'll see that we've asked the shareholders to approve to give the board authority to implement a reverse split if and only if it's a last resort to preserve the listing. So I think I expect that the shareholders will approve that at the June 12th shareholder meeting, but I'm optimistic that we'll never have to use it.
Well, thank you very much, Dan, for a great presentation and great answering all the questions here. Again, if you listen to this presentation and we didn't ask questions that you wanted to hear the answers to, please email conferences@littlegrapevine.com, and we'll make sure we get Dan those questions.
Yep.
Thanks a lot, Dan.
No, I appreciate it, Maj. You and your team do a tremendous job. Just remind everybody that the ticker is ECOR for electroCore. Have a great day.
Thank you.